Who is on their way to number 10? The Prime Minister's had a dreadful few days after his D-Day blunder, but the Tories are still trying to torture Labour with their disputed claims about tax. The power of the smaller parties has been centre stage this week. And there's been more antics on the campaign trail, and full-on Farage has been making the Conservatives very nervous. In the latest of our leader interviews, he will join us from Essex. And Stephen Flynn, the leader of the SNP in Westminster, will join us from Aberdeen. And with us in the studio for the programme this morning, Mel Stride, close ally of Rishi Sunak, the Work and Pensions Secretary, and the woman who would be Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, if Labour wins the election. Welcome to you both. Mel, rough old week for you guys.
We've got time. We've got 4 weeks to the general election, Laura, and the only poll that's going to matter is what happens on July the 4th.
Thought you might say that. Shabana, are you feeling chipper?
Well, I agree. The only poll that matters is the one that takes place on July the 4th. We're in a strong position, but we're still out there fighting for every vote. OK, well, we'll look forward to speaking to both of you a bit later in the programme. And we'll hear from John Curtis, of course, who will give us his 60 seconds on Sunday, his need to know on the polls.
Now, as many as 1 in 4 2019 Tory voters are saying they will back reform.
And our team at the desk for the next hour this week: Amber Rudd, the former Conservative Home Secretary, Matt Rack, the boss of the Fire Brigades Union, and John Caldwell, billionaire, I think, and former Conservative donor. A warm welcome to all of you. So there is undoubtedly, as we've seen this week, a big challenge to Rishi Sunak and his allies like Mel Stride from the Reform Party. It is profound. How will they handle it? We'll hear from him in a minute. But Nigel Farage joins us from Essex this morning. Good morning to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning.
Mr. Farage, if you get what you want in this campaign and you grab millions of former Tory voters, you're making it easier for Keir Starmer to get to number 10. Why do you want him to be Prime Minister?
I don't particularly, but I have to say the Conservatives have broken trust with the country, repeated promises in manifesto after manifesto to reduce net migration to tens of thousands a year, and now they've opened the doors to such a scale. Do you know that 1 in 30 people in this country today has come here in the last 2 years? The numbers are astonishing, the breach of trust is huge, and it's a total betrayal of all of those people that lent their vote to the Conservatives in 2019. And I do believe this should be the immigration election. The exploding population is impacting on housing, on rents, on the health service, on infrastructure, and the other two parties don't want to talk about it.
But some Conservatives, Mr. Farage, believe what you are doing also adds up to a betrayal, because the logic of you running in this campaign in the way that you are makes it much easier, potentially, for Keir Starmer to get to number 10. So I'll ask you again, why do you want him to be the Prime Minister?
Taking out polling companies like Savanta, who don't even prompt for reform, which is outrageous, opinion the same. If you look at the other polls, in the red wall, Reform are ahead of the Conservatives and are now the challengers to Labour. If you look in Wales, it is now neck and neck between us and the Conservatives. So in the red wall, a Conservative vote is a vote to put Labour in. The whole game is changing. This old tired mantra that a vote for this party or that party helps the other side. And look, back in 2015, when I led UKIP, we took more Labour votes than Conservative votes. So, frankly, let's be honest, the election's over. Labour have won already. Whether the majority is 200 or 350 is almost immaterial. The real question here is who is going to provide a voice of opposition in Parliament and in the country to a Starmer government. The Conservatives are incapable of it. They argue more with each other than they do standing up and fighting for their constituents or the country. And I think Reform needs to be in the House of Commons. And we've got a 5-year plan leading up to a general election of 2029. We're dead serious about this. The Conservatives had their chance. they've blown it.
Except that many viewers will remember that in this stage in 2017, Theresa May, a month out, was absolutely miles ahead in the polls. It looked like she was cruising to victory. Mel Stride's already told us, Shabana Mahmood's already told us and reminded everybody not a single vote has been cast. So you are taking voters' decisions for granted and claiming that you can be the real opposition. Is that credible?
I tell you what, if you went outside London and you met people in this constituency and others around the country who voted Conservative for the first time in 2019, their loathing for the Conservative Party as such, there is no chance of them going back. So let's face the facts. I know from a media perspective, you'd love to think that it's undecided. The election is over. The question is who's going to be the opposition. And right now, we're just 2 to 3 points behind the Conservatives. If we overtake them, well, you could find a big surprise result in terms of who gives that voice of opposition.
Well, let's then turn to some of the policies that Reform is putting over. You took over the leadership rather dramatically this week, having said you wouldn't run. You are now running, but I think not everybody is familiar yet with your policies. Now, in Reform's contract with the people, you call for £50 billion worth of spending cuts. So which public services would you get rid of?
Well, here's the point. The Bank of England is paying vast amounts of interest on their QE borrowing. Yes, I know it's very technical for a Sunday morning. I'm doing a press conference tomorrow in which I'll lay out how we can save £35 billion before we even start. I'll unveil all of this tomorrow. But yes, you're right. We want to raise the level at which people start paying tax to £20,000 a year. Why? It'll take 7 million people out of the tax system, mass simplification, a huge incentive for those not in work to go to work, and that's what I'm going to lay out tomorrow morning.
But I think viewers would like to know this morning, your party's already saying you'll cut £50 billion of public spending, so which public services would you get rid of?
Well, it's not about getting rid of public services, it's about making them more efficient. It's about the National Health Service not swallowing up huge amounts of money in diversity training and things like this. We want to live in a country where everybody is treated equally. And by the way, raising the tax threshold to £20,000 will be a lot of civil servants that we can get rid of.
But even the highest figures for spending on diversity training, which you cite there, Conservative Way Forward, the group have looked at this, and they say the most that you could get back would be 427 million, which out of cuts of 50 billion, that's a drop in the ocean.
Well, OK. All right, I'll go on. The inheritance tax threshold should be raised to 2 million. We will go on with other areas like that, mass simplification of the tax system, which will bring us enormous savings.
In terms of other things that you might want to do, you said on Friday, and you've mentioned this morning, you'd like to reform the NHS and you'd like to have a French model. Now, in France, there are upfront costs that people have to pay. They get some of it back, but not all of it. Is that what you would like to see in this country, where people have to pay upfront for their healthcare?
Let's be clear. We want healthcare to be free at the point of delivery. That was the founding principle of the National Health Service. What we're not having a debate about is this. We've gone up from just a few years ago, spending 7.5% of our national cake to 11% of the national cake on health. And guess what? The delivery has got worse, waiting lists have gone up. This model is not working. The French system of mutualisation is producing far better returns, whether it's stroke, cancer or heart disease. What I'm saying is, let's have a proper, open debate about this, because frankly, everyone knows that the NHS is not working the way it was 20 years ago.
I want to ask you about the Prime Minister's early exit from the D-Day commemorations this week. After that, you said that he wasn't patriotic, and you said that Rishi Sunak didn't understand our history and our culture. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. Absolutely right. He couldn't make a mistake over D-Day. He should have known in his heart that it was right to be there. I was there. I've been raising money for some weeks to send veterans back to Normandy. The vast majority of people in Britain felt this commemoration was important and the last opportunity to honour the remnants that are still alive. And by the way, I know what your question's leading at. 40% of our contribution in World War I and World War II came from the Commonwealth. He is utterly disconnected by class, by privilege, from how the ordinary folk in this country feel. He revealed that, I think, spectacularly when he left Normandy early. And out there now, there are millions and millions of people who were Conservative voters, traditional Conservative voters, not the red wallers, who are now thinking, do we go on supporting the Conservatives or do we support reform? And this is going to be, I think, the acid test of this election.
But Mr Farage, when you say our culture, I think many of our viewers might imagine that you are trying, not very subtly, to invoke, to emphasise the Prime Minister's immigrant heritage.
Yeah. I just made the point, 40% of our contribution in 2 wars came from the Commonwealth. Clearly, Mr Sunak doesn't understand that. And what an insult to the Americans. You know, that took place above Omaha Beach, where the Americans suffered so grievously. He has made the biggest mistake of his political career. If it wasn't an election campaign, there'd be a leadership challenge against him this week. The man is not fit to lead the country.
The Sunday Times today is carrying a story about one of your aides and colleagues, George Cottrell, who has a conviction for wire fraud in the America and has been named in another criminal investigation in Montenegro. Do you want him by your side on the campaign trail?
I, firstly, always stand by my friends. And secondly, there is a thing called Christian forgiveness. If people get convicted of something or do something wrong, well, they have another chance in life to go on and prove themselves.
Mr Farage, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Clacton Pier, I think, where you are standing for election. And there is, of course, a list of all the other candidates who are standing in Clacton. Information about every candidate who's standing in this whole general election is available for you on the BBC website. So wherever you live, you can check out what is going on. Now, we just have some important and sad breaking news to bring you this morning. There is very little detail so far, but we can tell you that a body has been found in the search for the TV and radio presenter Michael Mosley. See if you give them any decent marks. But we're first of all going to take a look at the overall picture, because everything that's going on at the moment is about trying to influence what you will do in the privacy of the polling booth in 25 days' time. And Professor John Curtis, the nation's favourite number cruncher, is keeping an eye on the polls. It's 60 seconds on Sunday.
Movement at last, but not in the direction the Conservatives were hoping. Every poll conducted since Monday's dramatic announcement that Nigel Farage was to return as Reform's leader has recorded a rise in Reform support, on average by 3 points. And every single poll has recorded a fall in Conservative support, on average by 2 points. Now, as many as 1 in 4 2019 Tory voters are saying they will back reform, up from 1 in 5 last week. Meanwhile, at least 3 in 5 Tory voters disapprove of Mr Sunak's decision to leave the D-Day commemorations early. But it is too early to be sure whether that row has done further damage to the Conservatives' poll rating. But one bright spot for Mr Sunak is that Labour support has fallen back a bit too, reversing progress they made earlier in the campaign.
John Curtis, well, a 21-point lead in the polls is not to be sniffed at. We will see what happens in the next few weeks. All three of you, it's been great having you with us this morning. As we go along, you know, we check the politicians' facts as they happen. Today, Nigel Farage said that his party, Reform UK, was only 2 to 3 points behind the Conservatives in the opinion polls. That is a very selective take. There have been 3 polls where the gap between the two parties was that small, but many more where it has been wider than that. And several pollsters have put the Conservatives over 10% ahead of Reform. Mel Stride was talking about the Conservatives' record on closing the tax gap. That's the difference between the total amount of tax that's due and the amount the government actually collects. He said that the gap was lower under the Conservatives than under Labour, but that doesn't really tell the full story. It was already falling under the last Labour government, and it's just fallen further since 2010. And a reminder for you again of that very sad breaking news. A body has been found this morning in the search for the TV and radio presenter Dr. Michael Mosley on the Greek island of Symi. That's according to a rescue worker there who has told the BBC. The body is yet to be formally identified, but I'm sure everybody's thoughts will be with his friends and family today. So that is all that we've got time for this morning. A huge thank you to my guests, Amber, John and Matt, and an even bigger thank you to you, of course, for watching at home. And buckle up. As we've said, the manifestos are coming. It's another chance for the Tories to try to grab attention. Theirs is expected on Tuesday. For Labour, it's another moment when they will be trying above all else to avoid making any mistakes. Tomorrow night, the Prime Minister will be here with Nick Robinson at 8 o'clock on BBC One and on iPlayer in the first of that series of interviews with party leaders, plenty of them. And I'll be on newscast later on BBC Sounds today. And as ever, you can catch up with anything that's been going on as iPlayer. And I will look forward to seeing you right here next Sunday, same time, same place.